All right, so today we're going deep on the Pat King sentencing.
Okay.
And for everyone listening, as you know, Pat King was a pretty prominent figure in the Freedom Convoy protests back in 2022.
Right, in Ottawa.
In Ottawa.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those really caused quite a stir, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So we've got some excerpts from a recent news article all about the sentencing.
Okay.
And we're going to kind of dig into what it all means, for the future of protests and all that.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so right off the bat, the article lays out the charges King was found guilty of mischief and disobeying a court order.
Okay.
And it mentions that he could be facing up to 10 years.
Wow.
10 years behind bars.
Yeah,
That seems pretty heavy.
it does.
Have we seen sentences like that in other cases, related to protests?
That's a good question. It's a really interesting point, and it's generating a lot of discussion.
Yeah.
10 years is definitely on the high end for this kind of thing.
Right.
Like, if we think back to the G20 protests in Toronto back in 2010, there were some pretty serious charges there, too. But even then, the longest sentence anyone got was 5 years, and that was for arson.
Wow. Okay, so what makes King's case different then? Like, what does mischief even mean in this context?
Yeah, good question. So in this case, mischief is more than just like causing a little trouble. It's about really disrupting people's lives on a big scale and interfering with property, right? Like, think about the impact of that convoy on the folks living in Ottawa,
Yeah.
block streets, all that noise, the disruption to their daily lives.
Yeah, it was intense.
Exactly. And the Crown is arguing that King was a big part of making all that happen.
Okay, I see. But the article also mentions that King was found not guilty of intimidation and obstructing police.
Right.
Why is that distinction important?
It's super important because it shows the court really drew a line between different ways people can protest, right?
Okay.
So he was acquitted of those charges, meaning they didn't think he was directly threatening anyone or messing with the police doing their jobs. So the judge seems to be really focusing on King's role in the bigger picture of disruption, not just any individual actions.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So we have this potential 10-year sentence kind of hanging over everything.
Yeah.
But then the article throws in this curveball.
Mm-hmm.
King's defense team is asking for time served.
Okay.
There's only 5 months.
Right.
Plus probation.
Uh-huh.
Why such a huge gap?
Well, this really shows you the tension at the heart of sentencing, right?
Yeah.
The Crown wants a tough sentence.
To make an example.
Yeah, as a deterrent, They're emphasizing how serious they think this was and the impact it had.
Yeah.
But the defense is focused on the other side, right?
Okay.
They want leniency. They'll point to mitigating factors like, King not having any prior convictions.
Right.
So the judge has to balance all of that.
It sounds complicated.
It is.
And then to make it even more complicated,
Yeah.
the article mentions that King was briefly back in jail
Uh-oh.
for violating his bail conditions.
Oh, boy.
How might that affect the sentencing?
Well, it's not going to help him.
Yeah.
Breaking bail conditions basically says you're disrespecting the court's authority. And it might make the judge wonder if King's actually going to follow any orders in the future.
Okay, so taking all of this into account,
Yeah.
the charges, the not guilty verdicts, the possible sentence, the bail violation, what do you think the judge might decide?
It's really hard to say for sure.
Right.
Judges have to consider so many things: the offenses King's character, the impact on the community, and what's happened in similar cases in the past.
Okay.
But what's really interesting here is that this sentencing goes beyond just King himself.
How so?
Well, it raises these big questions about freedom of expression and where we draw the line with protests in a democracy,
That's true. This case could really change how protests are organized and carried out in the future.
Exactly. Will people be more cautious? Or could this actually lead to more resentment and even more extreme tactics?
That's a lot to think about. Okay, so just to recap, we have this major figure from the Freedom Convoy facing some serious consequences. And the judge's decision is going to have a ripple effect on protests going forward.
It really will.
And it makes you think, where do we draw the line between the right to protest and making sure the law is upheld and everyone's safe?
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
No easy answers.
Not at all.
Well, it's definitely something to ponder as we wait for the judge's decision.
Definitely.
We'll be keeping an eye on it for sure.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.